Hello, this is Fam Electric Ghost. We have the Dead Coats on the line.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, so I just want to do a little intro. This is the Fam Electric Ghost Show. We've been interviewing indie artists worldwide since 2018. We're part of Spotify. Anchor FM is part of the Spotify family. And we love to interview indie bands from around the world. And this is the Dead Coats, and you're on Dissent Records, and this is their first act, right? Is that the case?
Yeah, I'm in the Dead Coats, and yeah, I do event coordinating for Dissent Records.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's the first show that the label is throwing.
Cool. So, so you guys are from Austin, and you describe yourselves as a grungy, punky rock and roll band. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's actually a funny story. Me and the guitarist Josh, we were actually from Baltimore, Maryland, and about 5 years ago, we wanted to like try to play music somewhere like out of the hood, and have a new life pretty much for ourselves. And so we chose Austin because it was like the music capital of the world. So we're assuming that, we can go wrong going where there's a bunch of music and it's known for its music.
Yeah, the big scene there.
Yeah. And it's funny, like South by just was canceled today. So it's really wild here.
So is that going to be a big problem? I mean, I know that's a lot of bands look forward to that, just like Coachella, it looked like all the big festivals. It looks like this whole coronavirus is going to like put the kibosh on like tons of music festivals. Like
Yeah.
worldwide, I think like worldwide they're being canceled. Acts are canceling their Asian and European tours like right and left.
It's an intense climate out there. It's weird. You feel like you're living kind of in a revolution right now, like with all the crazy stuff going on. And then now we have this virus that, everyone's kind of freaking out about, which, for good measure.
Yeah.
But I know it's like interesting because in the underground scene with, in Austin, there's thousands of bands. So not everyone gets the South by official
Mm-hmm.
showcases. So all of the underground venues and all the underground bands, like we're still having our shows. Like
Yeah,
we're
so
still,
you're still working.
yeah, exactly. It's like we still don't get a break.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's cool that you guys are still able to gig because, like, what I found is like I've been like an internet. I mean, I've done shows in Boston and in New York City, but I do Facebook Live shows from my home studio, and then I do this podcast so I can talk to people worldwide. So I've kind of embraced modern technology as an act to kind of get my music out there between using SoundCloud, and I'm on a record label out of New York, but yeah, I'm an indie guy. I have a punk aesthetic, so I like bands like yours. Because you guys remind me a little bit of Sonic Youth and Husker Du and Replacements. And
Hell yeah.
so, I
That's
mean,
really
I
what I
grew up,
listen to.
I grew up like into bands like that. I mean, the punk aesthetic is in my electronic music if you listen to it. But yeah, I mean, I think that anytime you come at something like a Trent Reznor or you come at it like a Bob Mould or do something that has a little bit of Joy Division in it, that it's always going to have that kind of punk attitude, whether you're electronic or actual real, punk hardcore band, which is cool. Because like I said, I'm a frustrated guitar player as a keyboardist. So I try to bring that kind of edge into my music. So I appreciate bands that can do that.
I've always said that, like, to me, like punk rock is like an attitude, and that, you can play whatever the fuck it is, but you're gonna be, punk if you have this attitude, and you don't have to look some type of way. You just are.
Yeah, it's like the way I think to me it's the honesty. If you think about Kurt Cobain in Nirvana, the reason people really like gravitated to him because he would compared to the hair metal bands that had been going on, he had this honesty about what he was doing. And he was just a pure artist. He just wanted to do, and it ended up kind of coming out as grunge punk, but it was just an honest, honesty in the way he approached things. And I think that's the thing about punk is like you're showing who you are. You're not trying to put any airs on. It's like you're being you, and to think that kind of comes through in the music.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, Um, it's just crazy to me that like there's so many different scenes and stuff, but I don't know, there's always like a lot of elitism and a lot of different, scenes. And when I feel like when you're authentic with your music and who you are, the audience will know that and usually like, stay and love you and follow you and, and that's how you have to grow. And I feel like every day, it's like becoming more and more, um, like more of myself every day. It's like a constant movement.
Yeah, I mean, people, you look at the bigger bands and there's always this mythology. And, I grew up liking progressive bands because I'm a synth head, so I like bands like Yes and Genesis, and there's a lot of overhead in those bands. But I liked what they were doing because it was like jazz. I'm into Sun Ra, I'm into Coltrane. So like if you're a keyboardist, you kind of gravitate toward things that might be a little like maybe heady a little bit,
Yeah.
but because like you're trying to do complicated things, whether it's jazz or classical or fusion or whatever, you kind of gravitate to bands that do that. Whether they're pompous or whatever, and sometimes the bands like Yes and stuff became rather pompous, like Pink Floyd's of the world. But I still appreciated the progressive nature of their music in terms of like how it was constructed and just
Yeah.
the level of effort. But regardless, like a punk band still has this kind of gravity to it, gets down to the bones of the music, and you get to that, whether you're a 3-piece or a 4-piece or a 5-piece band, it just feels authentic. But let's get into the questions.
Cool.
So like, when did you first get into music and at what age?
I think I think about like 8 years old, is when I really was like, I really want to play in a band. And that's like right when I found like the Beatles. I got into the Beatles really hard and I only had like two of their albums. And so I like would like just listen to it on my CD player like all the time. Um,
Which ones did you have?
I had Rubber Soul and Revolver. And
Oh,
then
those are good. Those are good to have.
yeah, and I think that's like started the basis for like my love of music. I wanted live music and I wanted to like uh, do more like I like ended up in theater doing like musicals. I played piano when I was like a kid. I did orchestra like for a long time. I just love listening to music and finding new things to try out.
So you like the Lennon McCartney like songcraft, the way they put songs together, because they were like pop geniuses, in terms of
Yeah.
the structure. They kind of created the whole album format with Sergeant Pepper, and the whole idea. Prior to that, bands were just doing singles, and maybe had collections that just were singles. But then when they started doing things like Rubber Soul, started to introduce kind of like a Sergeant Pepper idea, but the idea that you could have an album that had a theme, you know,
Yeah.
is kind of like that's how the whole late '60s through the '70s into the '80s bands, everybody name checks the Beatles. Like you start regardless of what genre you're in, it just seems to be like a standard bearer.
Yeah. See, I always like I've been always a bigger fan of like the like later Beatles.
Yeah,
I felt like I
Abbey Road,
yeah,
White Album stuff.
and Sergeant Pepper's and stuff. I was connected more like I feel like emotionally to those songs and like I they're all catchy, but some of them are like not as like they're more like weird and bizarre and
Yeah, it
have
kind of
like
started like the progressive stuff that bands like Yes and Pink Floyd went into. When you get to like Abbey Road and the White Album, you start getting compositions that aren't just trying to be hits. They're being very creative, and because they had the platform of the world, they could afford to experiment,
yeah,
um, and everybody would listen to it. But they were pushing the envelope of what you could do in pop music, which is really cool because it actually set the kind of template for other bands that came along after to say, hey, yeah, we can push it, you know. And I think that's what the cool thing about those compositions, like the changes, the chord, they're in different keys. They're actually different songs strung together. That kind of innovation you hadn't really seen in pop music, So I think that's kind of like why everybody loves them. But
well, their story too, like I've always felt like the underdog, and a lot of the time, like, and the Beatles have that same type of story. They're all pretty much nobodies, in
Yeah,
Liverpool,
yeah, playing in
and they're
Berlin, playing in Berlin bars, getting like bottles thrown at them.
yeah. It's like they should have never been famous. Like they had the odds stacked against them. But
Yeah,
some weird stroke of fate, and they're on the in the like bigger than Jesus.
yeah. Well, when you run into a guy like George Martin, they like this magical producer that made them push. They were like the original boy band. When the Beatles started, they were like the boy band. They were like a poppy boy band doing kind of 50-ish Elvis Presley kind of inspired stuff that, that might not really go anywhere if you don't develop it. And the fact that they got with George Martin and they started experimenting really heavy in all kinds of directions with, like George Harrison getting into all this mysticism and then Ringo having that this kind of pop sensibility, but being a really core drummer, and then Lennon McCartney just going off in different directions. And Paul's this melodic sense is just unbelievable. But like Lennon just had this experimental thing he was doing, and so it's just the combination of that. Like I'm into all types of music, but I still I really get tied into the Beatles all the time. And almost it's really interesting because like I've been interviewing people since 2018, and I would say 75% of the bands I talk to name check the Beatles, and it's still and this is like the next we're into 2020 and people are still talking about the Beatles.
That shows their commitment to music, and their longevity. They exist still now, like in everyone's minds.
Yeah, it's like if you're gonna write music, you kind of got to look at like what's there, in terms of like what the reference points are. And everybody will point to the Beatles. I as a keyboardist, I'll go into jazz. I'll go into like Sun Ra and Coltrane and Davis and stuff like that. But the Beatles, everybody knows who they are. Not everybody knows who Sun Ra is. They might not listen to any Davis or anything like that. But yeah, the standard bearers in any genre kind of drive things going forward, and
Yeah.
it's the way it goes. But so you've been working on music, like we started early, and you learned you can write on a piano. What do you play now?
So I'm the lead singer, and so I'm mostly focused on singing and being the front person.
Okay, so
Rolling.
your vocals are your instrument.
Yeah, literally. And I'd say as a vocalist, your body is your instrument.
Yeah, but do you still like use like instruments to write your parts when you're working on things?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you typically.
I totally I write riffs and stuff on my guitar, and like mostly like I just find lyrical patterns and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
things that I think sound cool, poetry, and then usually I bring those to practice, and like I have like a little journal, and then Josh, our guitarist, he usually comes with a riff or an idea,
Mm-hmm.
or like our bassist will, or and the drummer sometimes comes with like a beat, like Faith. Um, so it really depends on the song. I'd say that we jam a decent bit like every practice.
So you physically get together like a traditional like rock and roll band, like what people 3-piece, 4-piece, 5-piece band. What in the old days before the DAW, every band,
Hmm.
to write a song, they actually were in a garage or a basement or in a recording studio, and they kind of just jammed. And maybe people brought things to the ideas that they had, but it's the combination of everybody getting together that actually creates the songs. Is that how you guys write? Do you write kind of like an old school
Yeah,
way?
yeah. I feel like we've always been a very old school band. Um, we're a four piece. We don't really want to be like too crazy and have like a million instruments. Like we want to keep it to that
Core.
special formula in a way.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Who, because I think they were the original punks. If you listen to early Who,
Hmm.
but just the raw nature of like having those four personalities together, and what you can do when you kind of go off and then come back together.
Yeah,
Like the whole idea that Who
exactly.
was is they were individually kind of all crazy going off in different directions, but somehow they were able to keep it together. and that's why they kind of have this punk aesthetic. But I think like it's interesting that you guys are old school because there's so many bands today. I've talked to bands that look like a traditional four piece or three piece unit, but they record everything on the DAW, and then it kind
Yeah.
of loses that kind of raw nature. It doesn't sound like the Stooges. It doesn't sound like the Clash. It doesn't have that kind of edge. And when I listen to your music, I hear I hear Sonic Youth, which is really, you don't think that stuff's not written on a DAW.
Yeah.
It's actually played with heart and power. And I hear that with what you guys did. I've been listening to your stuff on Nice, the album Nice. And
Yeah.
I grew up listening to college radio. And I grew up when Who's to Do had like Zen Arcade and New Day Rising and stuff like that. That's kind of where I came from, listening to music, and you guys brought me back to that, which I don't really hear a lot of bands that kick off like that nowadays. Maybe where you are, there's a lot of bands doing that, but they're not really breaking through.
I think we're like, I don't know, like I'd say like we have like punk attitude and like sensibilities to like a lot of different genres of like music. We have songs that are kind of more like metally, and then we have songs that are like a straight up punk song or like a blues song,
Mm-hmm.
or so it's like we kind of call ourselves a party band
Mm-hmm.
more than like, or like a rock and roll band, because we have so much going on, and it's like hard to be like,
Yeah.
we're gonna play this single genre.
Yeah. I'm not saying it, when I look at like a punk band, like I think Kuskadoo and the Clash showed that within traditional punk music you can kind of go off. The Clash had Sandinista. They had Combat Rock.
Yeah.
They didn't just do punk. They went off and did Caribbean rhythms. They did reggae rhythms. They did some rap type of rhythms. So it's like, if you're like, if you could be labeled as a punk band, but you can be more than that,
Yeah,
And I think you
exactly.
guys are kind of like, I would say, like the Clash. You guys are mixed in multiple genres. You got that punk aesthetic, but you're not just like the Ramones. You're not just doing the same thing,
Yeah.
which is cool.
I think my biggest like issue with even the punk genre name is that like I look at some punk bands here that are mostly all doing the same thing, and it's like I feel like we're a little bit more beginning punk, like before it even was named
Well,
that.
you get to like
And
post-punk. If you look at like a band like New Order or Joy Division, are kind of like, they were more than just punk. If you listen to Joy Division or New Order, I
yeah,
mean, Joy Division became New Order, which became one of the biggest synthwave new romantic bands ever. But they started kind of in a punky place in Joy Division, but Joy Division still had like new wave aspects where it was punk, but it was new wave too. It had like a strange like sparseness to the sound. It had like a Berlin Brian Eno kind of thing going on with punk feeling, which I think it's the punk aesthetic is probably the best way to say something. You can have a punk aesthetic, but you can be cross genre.
yeah, exactly.
So that's cool. And I do hear that in your music. So like one of the questions we asked, like, when did you realize you had a talent for music that made you want to write your own material? Because there's lots of musicians that can play and become session musicians, or they work in orchestras, or they do covers, but they don't ever write their own music. What made you feel like you had something inside you want to write your own stuff?
I've always wanted to do my own. Like we used covers to like really learn how to like even play music as a band
Mm-hmm.
in a band setting. But I mean, I think that everyone feels always like an imposter, like that their music's never good enough in a way. But you just keep writing and stuff because it's like this need to get, the inside of you out, like how you feel. And like to me, like Patti Smith a lot. Like I was in like musicals and stuff, and I would write poetry, and I'd practice with my shitty band, um, and just try to get as much of that, like those feelings and things out.
Yeah, it's like there's a difference. Like when you meet creative people or creatives, there's something about it. Like they're gonna write, they're gonna keep on producing, whether they become the next big thing or not, because it's inside of them.
Yeah.
Because I've been playing since I was like 15, and I'm in my 50s. I didn't get I didn't
Yeah.
get signed to a label till like last year, but I just kept on playing because I love to play and I love to write. And like I knew people when I was 17 and they played in the garage, and then they said, well, it's not working, so they stopped. And so I think the people who have that creative drive, they never stop. They don't think of it as like a phase. When I was 18, I was in a phase and I'm done now. They continue to write just because they love to write.
Because it's a part of who you are, like, and like it's anyone's hobby or whatever, like, but in a way, it's like it's a coping mechanism and so much more.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself, I work things out in my music. And the thing is, like jazz and blues, it doesn't matter. Jazz guys and blues guys keep on playing till they die. It's not
Yeah,
based on like a look that you're only in a young person's game. If you play jazz or you play something that's a little like that, it doesn't matter. You could have gray hair, you could be overweight, it doesn't, you could be whatever. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter like you're trying to be the next like thing. It's the music, you know. So that's you just, so that's kind of aesthetic I'm into. It's like it doesn't, I don't have to, it doesn't have to be a young person's game. You can just do it because you feel it. Um,
yeah.
which is cool. But so when you were talking about the Beatles and some other bands, but I always ask the question, like, who are your influences and reference points in your music?
Totally. I think that for me, my big influences have been the Beatles, John Lennon, but Patti Smith a lot,
Mm-hmm.
Joan Jett. It's funny, moving here, we ended up like friends with people that were friends with like the Butthole Surfers and
Oh,
stuff.
cool! I
So
love them. SST, yeah.
it's like really interesting because I've learned so much about like you know uh like 70s and 80s punk here, and you know like really got into like the big boys and like the Dicks.
What about the Black
And
Flag? Black Flag, you
yeah, I like Black
yeah,
Flag
yeah,
too.
yeah. It's like I grew up with it. Before I got into Who's to Do, I was listening to Butthole Surfers and and Black Flag, and yeah. Then I just like I loved the Grant Hart and Bob Mould because they kind of brought this power punk. They had this melodic. I don't know if you ever listened to Who's to Do, but they got a melodic
Oh
sensibility
yeah.
that that's really rare in a punk band. They kind of called it power punk because it had this kind of power pop, kind of bad finger Beatle aspect to it, even though it's punk. Um, so it's that punk aesthetic again. Where it's kind of, their albums kind of aren't typical in their composition. They're all over the place in terms of their structure, which is cool. But so so your writing style or genre, you said you're basically in your description, you've talked about how you're kind of grungy, punky rock and roll.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like cross genre. And so would you want to elaborate more?
Like I said, we're kind of a party band. We have our music, and that's a big part of us. But the stage banter and like what our shows can be like. We're like parties. Like everyone's dancing and having fun, and we're saying a bunch of ridiculous, funny things on stage. Like we're a little bit off kilter. Like we always are stirring up trouble. I feel like.
Kind of like a Johnny Rotten kind of edge.
Maybe a little bit like we're more like happy go lucky and fun, but we're not like
That is
destructive
crazy.
people.
Well, not like early Who, where they're like trashing the stage and blowing up their instruments.
Not
Um,
yet. Maybe if we had a lot of money.
yeah, well, they didn't even have money when they did that. They
Yeah.
kind of blew. They kind of blew through their budget creating this mystique, and, and they didn't start making money till they kind of hit Tommy. But before that, they were kind of blowing through their budget. And I think I saw some documentary that Pete Townsend asked the tour manager after they did a tour, like early tour in like '67 or something, okay, what's the profit? It's like, well, there is no profit. You guys blew everything, blowing up the instruments on every show. It's like, no, we're actually in a negative territory.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I know
So,
everyone wishes they could have like a Coke budget like Black Sabbath, you know.
yeah. Ozzy, yeah, these guys were really burning through it. But yeah, so like one of the things I like to talk about also is like how you record. And I think we already kind of touched on it. You're kind of old school. Though, do you use, like, even though you're a punk band and you kind of record live, I'm assuming you still probably use a digital audio workstation in some way to even capture that, but maybe more live. How do you record?
So like usually we go to our friend at I forget his, I think it's Electric Factory or something
Mm-hmm.
studios. We go to Jason Richards, and he actually used to be the bassist for Rocky Erickson before Rocky passed, and
Mm-hmm.
um, but he's really cool, and we also like Saba Sounds. But I know he has like a really big, I don't know, mixing board. I
Oh,
don't necessarily know
oh
the
yeah,
specifics.
yeah. He's probably, well. Some people use analog boards, and nowadays some people have boards and they're tied to a DAW, and everything gets put. Eventually everything gets to a DAW in some way. In order to get it onto Spotify or anything, you have to turn it into some kind of digital format. But a lot of bands that play acoustic instruments like to get recorded in an analog fashion to like real analog tape. And some bands know about whether that they're doing that or not. But you don't necessarily, you can still capture like a punk aesthetic and get it on to like Pro Logic or something. It doesn't matter. But, we just asked this question if people were into that, because some people like to get into the details. But, those tend to be bands that are kind of heavily involved in that stuff. So if you're not
our
into
our drummer is like she went to recording school, so
mm-hmm.
she's the one that would know all of those specifics. I like manage us like pretty
Oh,
much.
okay. That's cool. I mean, sometimes we ask those questions if people on the line can get there, go there, because a lot of people do. Like, I'm a bedroom producer. I have a home studio, and I kind of use a DAW-less structure. I don't use a DAW because I want to capture kind of raw power, and I'm
Yeah,
using analog synths, and I don't use plugins. I don't use like Macs. I take real Rolands and Moogs and capture what I feel like as a keyboardist, which is kind of old school. Is kind of what you're doing.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
but yeah, and I think there's a lot of people who want to go that way now. There's more and more bands saying, yeah, the DAW is cool, but it makes things sound too perfect. And then you lose, I think, some of the nature of the music that we grew up with is the fact that bands kind of had happy accidents, and if you try to use computers to pitch correct and correct the BPM and put everything on the grid and make it perfect, it sounds great, but is that what music is supposed to sound like?
Yeah, I think
Shouldn't it
perfection.
have a little more humanity to it?
Yeah, yeah. I don't really like perfection in music. I like things to be weird and like a little bit a screw. Um,
Yeah, I think it's better if you actually do it. Like, sometimes if you do a bunch of takes, right, and you're a perfectionist and you do like 10 takes of a track, you go back to the first three, and it might actually have a little error, or you did a little hiccup or something in it. But the honesty of that early recording is better than what you did 10 versions down the line. And sometimes you got to have the guts to, like, I'm going to pick the one that's a little more raw because it actually has more honesty, or there's something about it. Even though I think I made it better, sometimes when the act of trying to make something better actually ruins it.
yeah, it's all about conviction, in your voice,
Yeah.
especially like feeling that, like having a very emotional performance is so like, about live performance and, in the studio.
But sometimes what happens, if you, like, when I've talked to bands, it's like by the time, if you keep on trying to do a song, right, you kind of start losing the initial impact of the first versions. And you can cut and splice things together, but sometimes it's like it's that initial honesty of what you were doing. And sometimes what happens, you even censor yourself because it's like, oh, I reeled a little too much, or it's a little too, you're kind of scared of being that honest, and then people start, covering it up or changing it to not really reflect what it was. And I think the great artist, and we get like a guy like Neil Young. Neil Young has some really awesome recordings where he decided with Crazy Horse, he's like, I'm going to keep it as raw and as honest as possible. And like get an album like Tonight's the Night, which is so raw and honest. It's like not a lot of artists would put something out like
Yeah.
that. And I think that's what I'm kind of getting at. But I think you understand what I'm saying,
Oh,
right?
totally.
But so you play live. You talked about it. Your live show is kind of like the key to your whole persona as a band, right? You believe like your live performance is even more like who you are than what's on record.
I'm sorry, my like phone just cut out. It's I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is like some bands like the Who, like they were known for their live performance more than even studio recordings. That people would like say, well, the Who was one of the greatest live bands ever. So would you say that your presence on stage, or your stage presence, actually is more about what your band is about than what's on record?
Partly, I'd say that like that's a big the live performance is like a big factor in our who we are, and like and probably mostly like we're really fun live. Whereas like I feel like our albums we break it down to be a little bit different, and really focus in on what we want on there. And we have songs that we don't play all the time on there too, like on our albums. So
Mm-hmm.
when we do play them,
It's kind of
they're
like
like kind
yeah.
of special. Like I like play violin and stuff on this song Rituals we have like live, and it's really cool.
Well, that's interesting because there's a lot. Another good band as an example as a live act is like the Dead, the Grateful Dead. The Dead heads followed them all around because like even though you did a Dead album, like the way you would experience the Dead is actually go to a Dead concert. Because the Grateful Dead, they just had like it was an experience.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's like some bands, like you can go listen to the record, and American Beauty, that's a great album, but like to see the Dead live was the way to see the Dead, to experience the Dead. I mean, that's just the way. Or a band like Parliament
Yeah.
Funkadelic, to see Parliament P Funk at their height doing the Mothership Connection with the spaceship coming down, there's nothing like that.
Well, I feel like we live in a society that you can listen to albums like continuously forever. Like there's so much new music that you're able to have access to now that a band's live performance is usually where I want to experience like music, because like
Mm-hmm.
I could sit here and listen to albums all day, but and experience like so much more. But I feel like the live performance is more where the emotion lies, and where the like experience is, and when you remember a band.
So, what do you think about bands that try to replicate their record so much that they sound kind of note for note on stage because they're so tied to like their sequencers, or they're so tied to using like some kind of DAW on stage, and so everything's kind of like, I can understand it if you've got dancers and you've got people who are like part of an act and you're kind of locked into doing it the same way. But what I find is that I'm a guy that likes to go see a band like the Allman Brothers or the Dead or P Funk, or I used to see Prince play live, and the whole idea of those bands is like every time you saw this, they played something, they didn't play it the same way they did it on the record. You actually wanted to hear them do it different than the record. But it seems like there's a generation of music fans that want to hear something exactly the way it's on the record.
I think there's like parts you can change, because like fans do like to sing your lyrics and like to know what's happening, because that's another part of the experience. But I think that like having guitar solos and stuff that changes every time is like an essential part of your music, and like some things need to be like similar, like everyone gets kind of bored with like a complete jam song like most of the time. Like
Yeah.
not every band can really go off on a jam and make it sound really good.
Yeah, not everybody's the Allman Brothers or P Funk or Prince. They're not going to be able to cut
Yeah.
it. but I understand people want to hear the hook, and this is where you get the age of the EDM and hip hop like artists that are able to replicate exactly what they're doing, and they might go off on their lyrics or change things up, but a lot of it is kind of locked in, and so like when I see a band like you, you're kind of still kind of running an old, not old, but like in the 70s, 80s aesthetic of the fact that you can go on stage and it'll be the song, but you can kind of change it up. You're not locked into running off a sequencer or running off the DAW because you're actually playing.
And you can add more to it. Like, there's like talking like in a set, sometimes adding little ad libs here and there. And then stuff happens.
Yeah.
Like this guy has like grabbed my hand and like put it in his mouth on stage before. And, just weird shit happens at a live thing. And your music will always be a little bit different, like too fast or too slow or,
Yeah. Well, if you're a band that's actually playing like acoustic instruments, you're more likely to have that kind of feel rather than if you're on a CDJ, DJ, like EDM, kind of structure where you're kind of locked into the light show. You're locked into what the dancers are doing. You're kind of on a track. And there's a lot of bands that are on these tracks and they're kind of locked in.
I think it's just unfortunate to like be stuck in that, like I feel like it would kind of suck because, it's just always.
Well, then it becomes like very mechanical and you're kind of servicing, like it becomes like a job instead of a passion. To me, it's like, okay, well, we've got to make sure the show is the show. And it's like, if you do a Broadway show, you got to stay within a certain structure. I can understand that. And if these shows are getting kind of run by musical directors that are locking it in like an orchestra, I mean, you're stuck. And this, I think sometimes that takes the life out of it. There's an old story about the Eagles that during their Hotel California concerts, Don Henley and his partner, Glenn Frey, they kind of said every time they played stuff from the Hotel California, they had to play it note for note exactly as it was on the record. And they would find the band if they didn't.
Damn.
And it kind of took the life out of the concerts, and everybody kind of got into their drug abuse because they weren't happy because they were playing the shows, but they were like, they weren't able to be free, and it made everybody in the band like miserable. So like you can kind of cause your own hell.
Yeah, totally. I've always felt like, anybody can play notes on a page exactly the same in a way, like over and over again. But it's like where that emotion lies, that makes a difference. Like no one wants to feel like they're just like, just doing the same thing over and over again without.
It's like you're a session musician paid to do something exactly the way they want it. And then you kind of can't have any fun,
Yeah, exactly.
And, it's like, I don't think everybody wants to be that session musician that's locked into what's on the page, They want to be able to elaborate and improvise and feel passion, about their music.
Yeah.
So you guys are continuing to do live shows, and you have some new live shows because of this new kickoff coming up.
Yeah, we do. We have like that, and we have like a list of like 8 shows for like the South by time, and a lot of cool stuff is always happening in Austin. So, but we also are getting out of town and going to Corpus in April, which is like the Gulf of Mexico, and we're planning a tour in like probably August time. We'll be out of here. I think.
So you're gonna go beyond Texas? You're gonna go to other states?
Yeah, we're thinking about going, either East Coast or West Coast. We did West Coast already once, so we were thinking of going East Coast because we haven't been all the way up there yet.
So you try like New York?
Yeah, probably.
Will you hit Boston or just like New York?
Oh, I'd probably try to hit both, like go up all the way. I've actually been like further up the West Coast than I ever did like the East Coast. Like, so I'd really like the experience, going further than New York City.
Yeah, it's like the New York scene and the Boston scene are probably like some of the better scenes in this area. Like we tend not to have as great a scene beyond that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm from New Hampshire, and there's really no good scene here, so I got to go to Boston and New York
Philly has a good
to
scene
do it.
in like Pittsburgh.
Yeah, yeah. If you go there, but like if you get to like where I am in New England, Boston's like the primary area, and then like all the other New England states, they're really not. I mean, Connecticut has a couple of places, but they're not really that
Yeah,
hot. Uh, New York is a lot hotter. Like if you're gonna go to Connecticut, you might as well just like skip Connecticut and go right to New
it makes sense.
York. But so what do you think about collaborating with other genres, like with like jazz or hip hop or EDM or trance or any other genre? Have you thought about working with other artists? That a lot of times people do features, but sometimes like within the kind of music you're doing, features usually don't work
Yeah.
in the same way.
I mean, I definitely have I would be really down to, collaborate with more artists and create more things. I've done like R&B and stuff a little bit. Um
Cool.
uh like my cousins play like folk music, and I don't know, I like to do new things, and I feel like I have a really good range for vocalists. Like I can most of the time successfully sing most types of genres. Um like,
Cool. So you would think about like working with like other bands to like maybe feature or work bring something to a different
yeah.
project other than what you were the Dead Coach. That's
Yeah.
cool. um so what are your thoughts on the future of music? Because like we're on Spotify right now. We're in this kind of streaming revolution where everybody has access, but then the other side of that is not everybody's getting the compensation that you got 20 years ago, but then maybe you wouldn't have got signed 20 years ago. Um, so what do you think of those kind of competing, tensions in the industry?
Uh, it's a rough industry sometimes. Like it's very like you don't really get a lot of validation for all the things that you do, and especially in
Mm-hmm.
Austin where there's like thousands of bands here, we're technically all competing for, the same opportunities. But, I try not to think of music like a competition because I feel like it'll just make you like dissatisfied and, really kind of upset. Because like I said, I've always felt like the underdog. Like it's easy to get discouraged because, people that haven't been in a scene very long, or, there's like factors like, who they know, and like how much money they have and their parents have, and like
Yeah, yeah,
socioeconomic factors that like really affect like the where most bands get to, you know.
yeah. It's like the payola thing. It's like we're in a capitalist system. So like if somebody comes in with that edge, like who they know and who they got the money to pay, they can get to the top of the line, to the front of the line before somebody who's been paying their dues. Just it's kind of like the way it works. But
But I
and it's good, disappointing. But you do it because you believe in it. You just keep
Yeah,
on
and
finding new
because
paths.
we're the underdog, like because like I'm from the hood, I should have never gone out of Baltimore, and I feel like that is like our edge. What makes you different? What makes you more,
Mm-hmm.
like like giving up things for your love of music and for the need to play it, that makes you have
Yeah,
like a different connection to it and makes you, sometimes a little bit more authentic to your audience, you know.
yeah. I think that honesty in the music, because you're not like, not that people pose, but some people have stage personas. Like Bowie had a persona that worked, and it wasn't pretentious. It was just kind of, he was theatrical, and he was able to kind of push through with that kind of thing. And then there's people like Kurt Cobain, where it's like he's not Ziggy Stardust. He's like that. He's Kurt.
Yeah.
You know, and there's not anything wrong with what Bowie did. Bowie was a genius in that way, but Kurt was a genius just in being who he was. And so it's like different ways that you can present yourself in music, and you can be honest in that in different ways. So it's really interesting to me because I think part of the issue I have with some of the what's going on today is this it's just an example I always tell people, like, kids are willing to spend $50 on an Xbox game, but they won't spend money to buy music from a
Yeah.
band.
Yeah, with streaming and everything
And it's
too.
like, yeah, so it's like before Napster, if you loved a band, you bought their CD, you bought their vinyl. Now, if you love a band, it's like you stream, but you don't buy their music. If you really love a band, you probably will buy a vinyl. You might buy the merch. You might do it, but because of these streaming services, and it gets you out there, but then you don't get the compensation that you would have got, 20 years ago when you had to get music from a record store. Is the only way
Well,
you
I
could get.
think that also, like, as the industry's changed, we have to develop new ways to think about, these problems. So people aren't buying your CDs, but they're streaming your music, so they're still listening to it, so that's a positive. But we need to be investing more into merch and, having more live shows,
Yeah,
because that's what's going to make you more successful and make more money. People don't buy CDs. That's fine. At least they're listening to your music.
yeah. I mean, what I find is if I go to New York and I have like some vinyl that I had a deal where I could bring like vinyl of
Yeah.
my record, or my own home CD stuff that I had burned, created. So if I go in and bring that with T-shirts and merch, I can make more money with that than I ever make on my Spotify.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like you have to run your own business. You kind of got to run it old school. I mean, that's what the Dead used to do. I mean, that's what a lot of old bands they used to kind of run. They made more money touring. A lot of bands always made more money touring. It's just the way
Well,
it
and it's
is.
like, selling, like even your records at shows wasn't always done. Like, Joan Jett was like, kind of a pioneer, because her music wasn't like sold in like stores at first, because they didn't, she didn't have a major label or anything, like, in doing it herself and selling shit out of the back of her car.
Yeah, like the hip hop crowd has been doing that for a while, but yeah, you have to kind of find new ways to do it. There's people doing like you know thumb drives. Now there's like thumb drives you can have like artwork done on them and then create a package around it that has like looks like a vinyl, but it has like liner notes, and there's all kinds of new things you can do. So you always have to look at what's going on. Can you present your music in a different way? I'm an electronic musician, so I look at sync licensing, and because I can, write compositions and stuff on my synths, I can actually compose things for video games and advertising and stuff like that. Um, so I can make a different income stream. You might not even know that my music is out
Yeah.
there. It's just different ways of doing it. So you do it because you love it, but you also find ways that you can make money at it, that you feel comfortable with. Um, and there's lots of opportunities in different ways to do things. So I think it gets you out there. It's kind of like the new radio.
Mhm.
I think the streaming services are kind of like the college radio or the radio station of the old
Yeah.
days. It kind of gets you out there to the audience, and then you got to go and do the show.
Yeah, I always prefer people just to come out to my shows and, support when they can, whatever way they can.
So you have a brand new album for 2020 coming out?
We do. We're about to record it. We haven't actually even talked about what we're gonna name it yet, but we have the songs for it, and that's really exciting. I don't know where we're gonna record it yet, but um,
Well, that's cool. Well, we love to have bands come on. If you've listened to our broadcast, we've had a lot of the bands we've talked to come on like 2-3 times. And one thing we like to do is when you have a new album, we like to do album release episodes where we kind of talk about every song on the
oh, I
new
love that.
project. So once you have that for 2020, you got it all firmed up and ready to come out. You can get back to us and we can do like a release party show where we could talk about each song and what what the inspiration is behind each one and all that
That would be
stuff.
really
So
great. I know that the rest of them would love that. They weren't able to come tonight because everyone was working, but
yeah, that'd be cool. Like if we could do that and have the rest of the people in the band, that'd be great. And yeah, it's cool to talk to a single focus. I've done this before with a lot of singer songwriters and leaders of bands. Sometimes we just get one member of the band, but then we get a really good conversation that's really clear. Because sometimes you have multiple people on, it's kind of it gets a little confused. But yeah, it's not bad either way. But it's cool to talk to you. And this episode is going to go out tonight within the
oh,
next
cool.
hour. It will be on 11 different podcast platforms, including Spotify and Apple Music, along with Anchor FM. And there's integration between Anchor FM and Spotify and Instagram and Facebook. And so we will be able to put Facebook stories and Instagram stories on our site, and you should be able to as well.
Awesome.
So we will do that on our Expansive Sound and Josephine Electric sites, because that's I'm a musician myself, and on my pages we push these episodes. So the Josephine Electric Instagram will push this episode, and Expansive Sound Experiments will also push it. And the Fam Electric Ghost on Facebook will push it.
Well, that sounds great.
We just like to remind everybody that we do this for free, but we are have the ability to get supporters on our podcast. So if you want to support this podcast and you like the fact that we do these long form interviews with bands across the world, we've talked to bands in Berlin, Australia, Japan. We're getting ready to talk to a band in Seoul, Korea tomorrow morning. So like if you like what we're doing, please become a supporter of the podcast. There's no requirement, but it would be cool if you would. So thank you for being on the show. And everybody go out and check out the Dead Coach on all the streaming services. We're going to have your link to all your websites on this podcast. So we will include
Thank
the
you
hyperlinks.
so much.
Thank you very much for being on the show, and
Yeah,
have
you
a great
too.
night.